Okay, so I just want to talk about sort of the mechanics of reading or looking at poetry. I want to introduce a couple of words to you if maybe you haven't heard of them before. One is the end-stop line, and the other is the enjambed line. If this were a classroom, I guess I would ask you if you know that. Maybe you can reflect on whether or not you know that or if you've heard those words before. But an end-stop line is a line that ends at the end of a syntactical or grammatical unit. A lot of times that means there will be a piece of punctuation there. So an end-stop line certainly includes any line that is punctuated at the end with a period, a comma, a semicolon, any sort of thing like that. But it's not just limited to that. You can have an end-stop line that does not have a piece of punctuation. So a lot of lines of Whitman are end-stopped, and then we also have enjambed lines. And I think as we move through time, and we'll see a lot more enjambed lines. So next week you'll see a lot more enjambed lines, especially in American poetry. Enjamming a line is a way of activating it, giving it some energy. We don't have a whole lot of enjambed lines at Whitman. We'll talk about that. So that's, a lot of his lines are end-stopped, and in a second we'll talk about why that might be the case. And then there's the enjambed line, right, which is just the opposite of the end-stop line. So instead of breaking at the end of the line at the end of a grammatical or syntactical unit, you break in the middle of it. And so there's almost, each line is almost kind of like a cliffhanger. You don't know how the line's going to end, and that propels you forward into the next line. So when I talk about activating the poem or giving it energy, that's one of the things. You get to the end of the line, you don't know how it ends, and so that propels you forward into the next line. We don't really have that in Whitman. If we take a look at section 2 of Song of Myself, it could really be any section, we'll notice that a lot of these lines are end-stopped. I think they all are. Houses and rooms are full of perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. End of line, comma, end stop. I breathe the fragrance of myself, and know it and like it, comma, end stop. The distillation would intoxicate me also, but I shall not let it, period, end stop. New stanza. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless, comma, end stop. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it, comma, end stop. I will go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked, comma, end stop. I am mad for it to be in contact with me, period, end stop, end of stanza. So however many lines we've got here, 6, 7, they're all end stopped. And not just end stopped with the end of a grammatical unit, but end stopped with a piece of punctuation. The stanzas end with periods, final, we're done, move on. And the other lines all end in commas, okay? So I think, in a lot of ways, Whitman deviates from the old forms, but old forms a lot of times still are end-stopped. But I don't think that he had the luxury of throwing everything out, right? If he invented a brand new poetry, had long lines that were enjambed, could you imagine trying to read Song of Myself if the lines didn't have these commas, if they ended in random places? I think it would start to blow your mind, not necessarily in a good way. I think it would become overwhelming for the reader. And so because he introduces these long lines, he understands that he has to give the reader a place to breathe before continuing on. A lot of times you'll see very short enjambed lines. We'll see some in Dickinson as we flip over in a couple of minutes. But because these lines are so long, you've got to take a breath somewhere, right? And the end stop gives you a chance to take a breath. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless. Breath. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it. Breath. I will go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked. Breath. I am mad for it to be in contact with me. Long breath as we get to the end of the stanza. So these are end-stop lines with Whitman. Now we're going to switch over to Dickinson. And I apologize, I'm not going to have a whole lot of videos about Emily Dickinson this week. Part of it's because I love Whitman so much that I wanted to talk about him. And another reason is I gave you some resources for the poems. I pulled up the Modern American Poetry site up from the University of Illinois. They don't talk a whole lot about Song of Myself for Whitman, but they do talk about several of the poems that are in your textbook. So if you're looking for outside information on her, I think that those are going to be good sources for you. So you can check those out on your own. But we are going to take a look at Dickinson and how she uses line and how it may be similar to or different from Whitman. So here, this is I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died, which is on page 1005 in your text. And I'll just go ahead and read the whole thing. I heard a fly buzz when I died. And now we have the dashes, right? So the dashes are something that we could talk about. They're a piece of punctuation. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air, between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry. and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed. In the room I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there interposed a fly, with blue, uncertain stumbling buzz between the light and me, and when the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. So let's just take a look at these lines. Hopefully you can see them in the camera, and maybe I can zoom in. Hopefully that's a little bit better. Okay, so let's just go line by line and figure out whether these are end-stopped or whether they are enjambed. I heard a fly buzz when I died. Well, we have the dash, so that's an end stop, right? The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air. Okay, so we don't have a piece of punctuation here. Now the question is it end stopped or is it enjambed? Well, what is this? Now we're going to get into grammar, all right? So you thought you were all done with it when you finished Comp 1 and Comp 2, but we got to come back to it. What is this functioning as in the sentence? Well, this whole thing, the stillness in the room, is the noun or the subject in the sentence, right? The stillness was like. So we have, this is a grammatical unit, it's actually the subject. This is a grammatical unit in the room. So these are ending, and now we have our verb. So even though it's not really an end, we don't have any punctuation, I'm not sure I would call that an enjambed line, right? Because you're still finishing the thought. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air, dash, end stop, between the heaves of storm, dash, end stop. The eyes around had wrung them dry, end stop, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset. Again, we don't have a piece of punctuation here, but we have subject, verb, and then we have a new piece over here for that last onset. So we have a prepositional phrase. So we don't have any syntactical units that are broken in the middle. So I'm still not ready to call these end stopped. When the king be witnessed, now here's a little bit different. Because this is a dependent clause, so we're kind of breaking up the dependent clause, right? When the king be witnessed. So, yeah, the king is the subject, like we've had subjects elsewhere, the stillness in the room, but this is part of an independent clause. Here, the syntactical unit starts at when and ends with be witnessed. So I would say that this is an enjambed line. When the king be witnessed in the room, dash, end stop. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable. So, willed my keepsake signed away. We have 3 lines without punctuation. Are they end stopped or are they not? Signed away. Well, you kind of want to know signed away what, right? It's kind of like a cliffhanger at the end of the line. So I would say that this probably is an enjambed line. What portion of me be assignable? Again, we've got that. We want to find out what portion of me be what? What's the object of the be? Assignable. So it's propelling us forward. And then it was there interposed a fly. So these breaks are really happening very quickly after the verb. Signed, one word. So verb, one word break. Verb, be, break. Was, verb, break. There interposed a fly. So an enjambed, or not an enjambed line, an end stop line with punctuation. And then you can see these are end stopped. And then I could see not to see. So I would say probably not really end stopped, or not really enjambed. And then I could not see to see. It's its own unit here. But I think that we've got a few enjambed lines. And so I'm not trying to do this to explicate the poem, but I just want to talk about what an enjambed line is, or what an end stop line is. And so you have these terms at your disposal when you're filling out your worksheets, or when you move on to other literature classes, or whatever your future may hold for you. So anytime you see punctuation, it's definitely end stopped. And then if you don't see punctuation, that doesn't necessarily mean it's enjambed. Ask what's happening at the end of the line. Do you have a chance to take a breath? Do you care what happens in the next line? If you do care and you're impatient, when the king what? Well, I want to know. I get impatient, so I want to move on to the next line. These are cut, or these are broken right after the verb. I want to know what happens right after the verb, so I'm propelled forward. So these are enjambed lines. So these are questions that you can ask to try to figure out those sorts of things.